Okay, so we are on Canto 3, Chapter 26, Text 46. Is that correct? Seems so. Yeah. Bhavanam brahmanasthanam dharanam sadvisheshanam sarvasattva guno bedha prithivi vritti lakshanam bhavanam brahmanasthanam dharanam sadvisheshanam sarvasattva gunodbedha prithivi vritti lakshanam bhavanam brahmanasthanam dharanam sadvisheshanam sarvasattva gunodbedha prithivi vritti lakshanam bhavanam brahmanasthanam dharanam sadvisheshanam sarvasattva gunodbedha prithivi vritti lakshanam bhavanam brahmanasthanam dharanam sadvisheshanam sarvasattva gunodbedha prithivi vritti lakshanam bhavanam brahmanasthanam dharanam sadvisheshanam sarvasattva gunodbedha prithivi vritti lakshanam. Vaishnavis. Bhavanam brahmanasthanam dharanam sadvisheshanam sarvasattva gunodbedha prithivi vritti lakshanam bhavanam brahmanasthanam dharanam sadvisheshanam sarvasattva gunodbedha prithivi vritti lakshanam bhavanam modeling forms. Brahmana of the Supreme Brahman. Sthanam, constructing places of residence. Dharanam, containing substances. Sadvisheshanam, distinguishing the open space. Sarva, all. Sattva, of existence. Guna, qualities. Udbheda, the place for manifestation. Prithivi, of earth. Vritti, of the functions. Lakshanam, the characteristics. The characteristics of the functions of earth can be perceived by modeling forms of the Supreme Brahman, by constructing places of residence, by preparing pots to contain water, etc. In other words, the earth is the place of sustenance for all elements. So here's Prabhupada. Well, actually, we should do responsibly. The characteristics of the functions of earth can be perceived by modeling forms of the Supreme Brahman, by constructing places of residence, by preparing pots to contain water, etc. In other words, the earth is the place of sustenance for all elements. So, Prabhupada's purport. Different elements such as sky, sound, air, fire, and water can be perceived in the earth. Another feature of the earth especially mentioned here is that the earth can manifest different forms of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By this statement of Kapila's, it is confirmed that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Brahman, has innumerable forms, which are described in the scriptures. By the manipulation of earth and its products, such as stone, wood, and jewels, these forms of the Supreme Lord can be present before our eyes. When a form of Lord Krishna or Vishnu is manifested by presentation of a statue made of earth, it is not imaginary. The earth gives shape to the Lord's form as described in the scriptures. In the Brahma Samhita, there is a description of Lord Krishna's lands, the variegatedness of the spiritual abode, and the forms of the Lord playing a flute with his spiritual body. All these forms are described in the scriptures, and when they are thus presented, they become worshipable. They are not imaginary, as the Mayavada philosophy says. Sometimes the word bhavana is misinterpreted as imagination, but bhavana does not mean imagination. It means giving actual shape to the description of Vedic literature. Earth is the ultimate transformation of all living entities and their respective modes of material nature. Bhavanam brahmanasthanam dharanam sadvisheshanam sarva sattva guno bedha prativi vritti lakshanam. The characteristics of the functions of the earth can be perceived by modeling forms of the Supreme Brahman, by constructing places of residence, by preparing pots to contain water, etc. In other words, the earth is the place of sustenance for all elements. So in this section we have been talking about the unfolding of the various elements of Sankhya philosophy. And we learned that from ether we get sound, and then from air we get touch, from fire we get form, from water we get taste, and finally from earth we get odor. In that order. So those things are all generated one from another. And we move from things that are subtle, or what we might term as abstract, to things that are more and more palpable. So earth, as Prabhupada mentions here in the purport, is the most palpable because it contains all the sensory data. It has touch, it has taste, it has smell, it has form, and it has odor. So all those things are contained within earth. And actually, that is what we are searching for in the world. Whether we understand about the Supreme Personality of Godhead or not, we are searching after substance. It's a simple word. What do we mean by substance? Something that is not superficial, something that affects us in a very abrupt and physical way, something that's not light or intangible or wispy. It's something that's very solid. Now, of course, substance means different things in different contexts. If someone came to me and said, what have you done of substance? And I brought 3 big rocks and put them in front and said, there they are. And so the rocks are certainly substantial. I could hit you with one of them, and that rock would be very substantial in that sense. But as far as an accomplishment in life, it has no substance. It means nothing. I didn't carve it. I didn't do anything with it. It has nothing to do with me. So I couldn't use it as an example of some substance, that I had done. Of course, on the other hand, if you were attacking me, a rock would be a good thing to have. It would be a good thing of substance to be able to wield. And I was thinking too, if you were in a difficult situation and you had a court order, if somebody was attacking you, you could throw the court order at them and that wouldn't do much. But if it was the police that were coming to you, then you hand them a court order and it does do something. It has substance. So actually this happened just 3 days ago, but at any rate, I don't want to get into that. But, the whole point is that this idea of substance is what we are really looking for, something to give our life meaning and something to be able to feel like our life is not wispy, superficial, meaningless, drifting, and all those things. And if one does not have any connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one's life will be like that. It will be meaningless, wispy, drifting, insubstantial, and these things do not make a person feel happy or satisfied. And of course today is the Disappearance Day of Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī. So I thought to speak a little bit about him today, and his life was about substance. And we get the kind of interesting interaction of someone who is living on the borderline between the material and spiritual world, sometimes living in the spiritual world and sometimes living in the material world. And he was, of course, a Bābājī, which actually in ISKCON we don't give Bābājī initiations, or we don't take Bābājī Vesh. And the whole idea of Bābājī Vesh was that a person would become very advanced in spiritual life. And Bābājī Vesh means that you're not a Brahmana, a Vaishya, a Shudra, or a Kshatriya. It means you're not a Brahmachari, a sannyas, a Vanapast, or a householder. You are none of those things. You give up your Brahman thread and you wear one piece of cloth. And all those designations are gone. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in consultation with his, actually Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati, in consultation with his father, began to become more and more aware that this is a very high calling, and most people are not ready for it. And there were many, many instances of people taking the Bābājī Vesh and not really being able to live up to the requirements of it. Simply having sex on the side, or living some kind of mimicry of high devotional achievement. And for many illiterate, or especially those who were not trained in understanding spiritual life, this kind of activity would often pass as great devotion to the outside people. And this was one of the things that Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī himself found very irksome. And he oftentimes challenged or exposed people who were supposedly great people of spiritual stature, who were just either being able to manipulate their emotions so they could appear to cry or tremble or whatever. In other words, make a show. So this was quite common, and to some extent it's quite common today. That not so much in the Western world, because, you don't get any points in Western society for being a high spiritual person, so there's no impetus to fake the symptoms, crying, rolling on the ground, trembling, etc., etc. Sometimes we do see this, so I've seen it, people who roll on the ground and act somewhat deranged in a temple, and this is something that can happen. And this is not substance, this is external show. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was not at all satisfied with seeing this kind of thing. So he made a change. Instead of giving people Bābājī Vesh, he thought to revive the process of giving people sannyas. So prior to Bhaktisiddhanta's time, generally speaking, when a person advanced in our disciplic line of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, they, more than anything else, would likely be given Bābājī Vesh. But not Bhaktisiddhanta. He felt that this was something that was beyond, and besides, it was there was a need for preaching. So if somebody took Bābājī Vesh, they sequestered themselves somewhere and sat alone in a bhajan kutir, or maybe just some secluded location, and they chanted, or at least outwardly appeared to be chanting. And then where was their ability to preach? Here is someone who is of the highest spiritual character, at least theoretically. And how were they going to communicate that to other people? They were away. So for the reason that most people weren't qualified for such a position, and for the fact that it allowed for preaching, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati established that in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, one, instead of taking Bābājī Vesh, would be promoted to taking sannyas, or at least vanapas. So that's why in ISKCON we don't give Bābājī Vesh. And of course, we also see something here. I'm actually quoting a lot of things from a book written by the late Karnamrita, who wrote a book called Two Beyond Duality, So we're talking about substance, and here we're talking about duality. So, and that it's a hagiography, or a book about the life of, I think, Vamshidhar and Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī. I don't remember what the other devotee was in the book, because I couldn't find the book. All I have is my notes on the book, so I have to work from them, and sometimes they're cryptic, even for me. So this book talks a lot, and it makes a connection between the fact that as Bhaktisiddhanta came on the scene, the Babaji Vesh got phased out of our understanding of how the disciplic succession should continue. And it is said that Bhaktisiddhanta did not give Babaji Vesh to any one of his disciples, nor did he recommend solitary chanting to any of his disciples. Rather, he wanted them to be preachers. And so similarly, A.C. Bhaktivedanta simply followed that same pattern. We don't give Babaji Vesh, and we don't recommend people to go somewhere alone and simply chant. Although we can ask the question, and the book does raise the question, why do some people become Ghostiyanandis and others simply stay Bhajananandis? And the reply is that Krishna gives indications to devotees, and some devotees are indicated by Krishna to remain preachers. And so that's why we say that sometimes the Uttama Adhikari, he comes down to the second class, to Madhyam state. Even he remains actually in one sense an Uttama Adhikari, but he comes down to the second class stage. And that is for the sake of preaching. Whereas the Bhajananandi remains on the Uttama Adhikari stage and does not preach, but rather lives a solitary life, and is free then to interact with his Lord, with Krishna, in his inner life, in whatever way he wants. And generally speaking, then he does not confuse the materially minded population, because this borderline between two worlds, between the spiritual world and the material world, is a strange place. We were discussing the other day the life of Srinivasacharya, and he would cook. He would make milk for his as part of his eternal service to the Supreme Lord. And in cooking, the milk would sometimes boil over, and he would try to keep it from boiling over. But all he had, because you know how milk is, that it looks like nothing's happening, and suddenly, it just, in just seconds, it decides it's going to boil over. And so he would just try to push it back with his hands, and it would burn his hands. But of course, this was happening in his mental meditation. But when he would come out of his mental meditation, his hands would really be burned. And so it shows that there's an overlap. Because in fact, the material world and the spiritual world are not two different things. We're in the spiritual world right now, believe it or not. But we don't have the right consciousness to see it as such. When we become purified, we can see that even this is the spiritual world. There is no material world. But because our consciousness is not pure, we perceive what's known as matter, and we misuse what is known as matter. And because we use it wrongly, we have a wrong attitude towards it, and therefore it is the material world as far as we're concerned. And so that's the whole thing. So one of the things that we recognize or we learn is that Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī was born somewhere around the year 1830. So he was born, where is it here, in a place called Vagyana in the district of Faridapur, adjacent to Tepakola, wherever that is. It's somewhere in Bangladesh, I think, today, somewhere in modern Bangladesh. And he was a grain merchant, and his parents got him married early in life, so he spent 20 years as a householder. And then his wife left the world, so he took that as an opportunity then to go to Vrindavan. So he left behind his business and everything he was doing, and he went to Vrindavan. And so sometimes he would live in Vrindavan, and sometimes he would come to Navadvip. So he would travel back and forth. So sometimes he would be in one place, and sometimes he would be in another place. And toward the latter part of his life, when he was 60, in 1898 or thereabouts, he became almost completely blind. But Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī, he had several characteristics that that a lot of people remark about. One of them was he did not want anyone to serve him under any circumstances. So as he was starting to develop his blindness, Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati both, they wanted to take him to a hospital. Maybe it was cataracts or something like that. They wanted to help restore his vision, but he refused to go. And he said, "I will not go to the illusory material world," which was his word for the city we know as Calcutta. So the illusory material world was named Calcutta to him. So he didn't want to go there, and he didn't want to be served by other people. And it's interesting too, because when he would go from one place to another, he would sometimes be in Kulia, and sometimes, he would be somewhere else. And when Bhaktisiddhanta or Bhaktivinoda Thakur would meet him, they would think, how did this nearly blind person get from one place to another? It wasn't like today where you just get on a rickshaw and pay somebody some money and get there, There weren't any direct routes, and you had to go through some undeveloped territory and so on and so forth. And he said, someone showed me the way. So what the conclusion was that Krishna himself was taking Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī and showing him how to get from one place to another. Of course, he took initiation from Bhagavat Dāsa Bābājī, and Bhagavat Dāsa Bābājī was a disciple of Jagannath Dāsa Bābājī, who was the spiritual master of Bipin Bihari, who was the spiritual master of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. I think I got that right. If not, Ram Roy will say something to the contrary. He didn't want Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī did not want to give initiation to anyone. He felt worthy and incapable of giving initiation. And that's why Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati had such a difficult time getting initiation. When Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati came to Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī, he requested initiation, and Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī kind of didn't pay much attention. Then he asked on another time, and Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī said, well, when I see Lord Chaitanya, I'll ask him. Of course, Lord Chaitanya had been gone for hundreds of years, but Bhaktisiddhanta, could understand that probably he could ask Lord Chaitanya. And so the next time he saw Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī, he said, my dear Babaji, so I asked you about initiation, and you said that you would ask Lord Chaitanya. And Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī said, well, yes. And so Bhaktisiddhanta said, well, did you see Lord Chaitanya? And Gaurakiśora replied, yes. He said, well, what did he say? And Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī replied, I forgot to ask him. So this went on for some time until, of course, Bhaktisiddhanta said, well, if you don't plan to initiate me, then there's no purpose in my life, and I might as well commit suicide. So when Gaurakiśora saw that Bhaktisiddhanta was so determined to take initiation from him only, he relented and gave initiation to Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati. It was the only disciple he ever made. So, which is interesting. Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati was a great erudite scholar, a knower of mathematics and of astrology. He knew many languages. He could speak English, whereas Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī himself was illiterate. He couldn't even read. So it's interesting to see such a situation. And Gaurakiśora used to really love listening to Bhaktisiddhanta give classes. Of course, he also would listen to classes from Bhaktivinoda Thakur as well. So there were a number of different times where he would listen to various classes. And he lived a very simple life. It's said that the only thing he owned was a torn piece of cloth, some beads, and 2 books. The Partana and one other book. I forgot what the name of that other book was. So that was all he owned, and he would travel just with a torn piece of cloth that he would get. He would get these pieces of cloth from the crematorium. When somebody would be cremated, or there would be some leftover piece of cloth somewhere, he would take that. So, and that's in true Babaji fashion, that one would take only a discarded piece of cloth. Of course, we see that Babaji concept was there, and in one sense, that's what Lord Chaitanya did. He was kind of in that same sort of, status of life. So, at one point, he came and resided for some time in Svananda Sukhada Kunj in Godruma Dweep. And there, Bhaktivinoda Thakur had, some kind of a setup there, and he would spend time there. Sometimes he would read Bhagavatam from 3 till 5 in the evening, and Gaurakiśora would go there and hear from Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And sometimes, because he couldn't see well, And because he was so unconcerned about externals, he wasn't dressed properly. In fact, sometimes he was completely naked. Sometimes he would be, in difficulty, or at least apparently so. And sometimes he would appear to suddenly, for no reason, make harsh sounds. And there was one example where he was with some people. This was happening a lot to him. People had heard that he had a great reputation for being a very exalted devotee. So because he was so exalted, he was always surrounded by various sycophants who, wanted to, get some mundane blessing from him, or they wanted to get some, transfer radiance by being in his association and calling themselves one of his intimate associates or followers or something like this. And he really disliked this kind of thing. And so sometimes he would purposely insult these people or show what they were really up to. And one time he was so disturbed by it that there was a wealthy man named Mr. Girish and his wife, and they came to Gaurakiśora, and they said, "My dear Gaurakiśora, you are such a great sadhu. Is there anything we can do for you?" And Gaurakiśora thought about it, and they said, "We would like to build a bhajan kutir for you." And Gaurakiśora didn't say anything, but sometime later, he said, "Actually, you asked that you could do something for me. There is something you could do for me. You could let me have your broken bathroom." So they had an outhouse where there were several stalls where people would pass stool. He said, I would like to have that. And Mr. Girish, "Oh no, Sadhuji, we can't give you our latrine." And Gaurakiśora said, "You just asked me if you could do something for me, and now I ask you to do something, and you won't do it." So then he was caught by, the crossfire of that interchange, and as a result, Mr. Girish said, okay. And then he had some men fix it up a bit and clean it up a bit. But then that's one of the reasons why Gaurakiśora wanted to go there, because it had that stench, and he knew that people who just wanted to bother him and people who were only interested in materialistic things wouldn't go there. So he spent a lot of time there. But nevertheless, there were people who would go there. There was this one young man who came there and wanted to, sort of be a sidekick or to follow the same path as Gaurakiśora. So he would spend time there, and, Gaurakiśora would chant, and this young man would chant. But of course, the young man was unable to be as focused as Gaurakiśora was. So Gaurakiśora would speak to him and say, "What are you doing in there?" And of course, for a few days, the young man was able to hold up some pretense of chanting, but after a while he would go and come, and Gaurakiśora could understand that actually he was going into town and he had some liaison with some lady there, and he said, "You are just cheating." This was kind of commonplace. And we see this is a kind of thing that happens quite often in spiritual life. People try to put on a show or try to act on a level which they actually cannot legitimately maintain. As we're saying, we're looking for substance, we're looking for things that are real, for people to do what they say they're doing, and for people to live according to principles, and not just appear to be living according to principles, but genuinely be living according to those principles. So substance is what gives life. Otherwise, in Kali Yuga, the tendency is always for things to look a certain way on the outside, but actually be some different way in reality. And this is evident everywhere, especially in spiritual circles. And of course, if you read the Srimad Bhagavatam in the later cantos, we hear about what Kali Yuga will be like and how religion will degenerate in Kali Yuga to the stage where it is merely external signs and symbols and nothing more. That there won't be any substance to religious people, there won't be any substance to the rituals that they do, there won't be any substance to the things that they say. It'll all be simply for show. So, sometimes people would show up, and one time a young man and a landholder showed up, and the young man explained how pious the landholder was and how devoted he was, and how just a few days ago he had 45,000 rupees stolen from him, but he didn't even think about it. He was just chanting, and how and they had come from some distance, and they wanted to know about the discussion between Lord Chaitanya and Ramananda Roy. And Gaurakiśora said to the young man, he said, well, if you want, I will explain to you a little bit about the conversation between Ramananda Roy and Lord Chaitanya, but you have to get rid of this cheater, which he meant he was indicating the landholder. And, the landholder, of course, felt insulted and left. But, this was a kind of common happening for Gaurakiśora. At one point, Gaurakiśora was with a group of people, and he wasn't saying anything. And the people were just kind of in his audience there. And he grabbed a stick, and he was saying, get out, get out. And, they thought, what's wrong with Sadhu? I guess he doesn't want us here, and so they got out. But what actually was happening was that although he was in Navadvip area, he could see that a goat was eating tulsi leaves in Vrindavan, and he was chasing the goat away from the tulsi plant. And this is why people misunderstand people who are at this level of spiritual achievement. So many people didn't understand him. Of course, oftentimes when people would put up some pretense, he would cut through it right away. One occasion, a man came, and he came to Gaurakiśora, and he said, I've heard that there is some great sadhu in this area, and I would like to meet him. And Gaurakiśora said, some sadhu? I don't know who that is. Maybe someone else knows, but I don't know of any sadhu living around here. Of course, the man had inadvertently come to the very sadhu he was looking for, but Gaurakiśora didn't have any sense that it was him. So, of course, he had to go somewhere else, and then he discovered that the very person that he had met and asked was the sadhu that he was actually looking for. sometimes he would wear a tiger skin cap, which is an interesting thing. One time a lawyer came to him, his name Bhattacharya, and the lawyer said, please give me some instructions. And so Gaurakiśora said, don't eat food cooked by fish eaters. Don't wear any clothes that, how did he put it here? That haven't come from a crematorium. And he said, actually, you have to change your entire life. And then, of course, the man protested. That I cannot do this. This is too extreme, and so on and so forth. He said, well, then you are just a fake. And then the man was insulted and left. And Gaurakiśora, he said that a man can live for 50 years in household life, and he's constantly insulted by his wife and by his kin, and sometimes even his children, and he just laughs about it. But a sadhu gives one remark that's cutting, and he's prepared to give up sadhus for the rest of his life. So he was making a point of the fact that the words that the sadhu uses to cut attachment to material consciousness are sometimes sharp, but they're not intended to harm or to demean. They're intended to liberate a person from their own false ego. And this is actually the calling of sadhus. But people usually don't think of it that way. There was another story where during Chaturmas, when it was raining, he came to live in a area which was like there was a shed and then a main house, and he didn't want to live inside, so he was living around this shed, and there was a rope shelf hanging from the overhang. There was an overhang, and that rope shelf had some rice for him to eat. And there was a lady who was in that area. I don't know whether she owned the house or she was just in that area or whatever. But one day, he was trying to get some rice, and there was a big snake in the shelf. And the lady said, "Oh, Babaji, you have to be careful. I know you can't see, but there's a big snake here." And Gaurakiśora said, "You must be very tired standing there for all this time. I think you would be happier going somewhere else." He was in, kind of a roundabout way, just telling her to please mind your own business. She said, no, Sadhuji, you could be bitten by this snake. And he said, no, I am not worried about this, but please leave me alone. And she said, no, I'm going to stay here to make sure the snake doesn't bite you. Finally, he convinced her to leave, and then somebody asked him about the situation, and he replied that she was Maya, that she wanted to control based on a superficial posture of compassion or of wanting to help, But he understood, and he wasn't worried about the snake. And he, didn't want her input. And so this was just the kind of thing that he had to constantly deal with, people who couldn't understand what he really wanted. And they came to him with material purposes. One time a man came and said, "My dear Babaji, let me touch your feet." And Gaurakiśora wrapped his feet up in a blanket and said, there are no sweet words here. I have no mercy to give you. I don't have any money, and I don't have any sweets or ashes to give you. Please go somewhere else, where someone else will give you all those things, because he was not interested in giving people cheap blessings or helping them to get their material desires fulfilled, which is what constantly happened. People would come with petition to get his mercy so that they could get some material benefit of some kind or another. And we find, we'll wrap it up here, that he left the world in, what year was it here? On November 16th, 1915. So he left, I think, just 1 year after Bhaktivinoda Thakur left the world. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati lost first his father and then his spiritual master in 2 years, 1914 and 1915. It doesn't give any details on exactly how he left the world, but we know that when he did leave, he had given instructions that when he would leave his body, that people should drag his body through the streets and say that here is Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī, the greatest sinner. And so when he left the world, he only had one disciple, and that was, of course, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And the other Babajis, they wanted to claim his body because they wanted to make a samadhi, because they knew that if I make a samadhi for Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī, people will come and then I will collect whatever donations that they give, because people come to a samadhi and they give some donation there, and this is how I'll make a living, So that was the reason that they were doing that. So each one of these Babajis claimed to want to, they were actually arguing over who would get the opportunity to create a samadhi for Gaurakiśora. But that's when Bhaktisiddhanta showed up. And he said, "No, I will make the samadhi." And they said, "But you are just a brahmachari. You don't have the status that we have as Babajis. We are Babajis, and we are the rightful people to lay claim to making a samadhi for another Babaji." And he said, "Well, I may just be a brahmachari, but at least I don't have illicit sex behind closed doors." And they could see that the scene was getting very tense, and the police were there. So the police said, Bhaktisiddhanta actually said, "If any of you have not had illicit connection with a woman in the last month, then you can claim his body. Step forward." And the police said, "Well, how will we know if they're telling the truth?" And Bhaktisiddhanta said, "I will accept their word." And as he made the challenge, well, if one hasn't had any illicit connection with a woman in the last week, please step forward. And one by one, all these Babājīs left. So he was given the charge. And then, of course, the group there was saying, well, what about dragging his body through the streets, saying, here is Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī, a great sinner. Bhaktisiddhanta said, I have a bat, and anyone who wants to touch the body of my spiritual master, I have this bat for them. So he said, you do not understand the grave humility of my spiritual master. So Bhaktisiddhanta, in fact, did make a samadhi for Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī. That's a whole story in itself. But that's how we can end it today, and we're quite over time. But if anyone has a question or something that they would like to really ask, we can maybe answer it if there's anything coming from our assembly of devotees here. Yes, can we get, do we have a microphone? Or, oh. So he was one that was actually kind of a Bābājī, or?
He was actually one.
Okay, so maybe there was one. That one I'm not sure. I didn't hear of, but it could be that that's true too. So I don't know about that. I have to defer on that one.
Yeah.
But thank you for bringing it up. All right, so thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Gaurakiśora Dāsa Bābājī. All glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. All glories to Radha Govinda Dev. Hare Krishna.